I'm going to have to use the mic because I'm losing my voice. I think Teresa Younger answered the question appropriately. Are we post-racial? No. And the reason why I think this is because if you look at American society, you can ask, well, at what point would this have happened? You say the 1950s and 60s, we're pretty sure we weren't post-racial, right? We were in the civil rights movement proper. In the 1970s, we still kind of know we weren't because the civil rights movement may have been ending proper, but you still had things going on around civil rights. In the 80s, I mean, we saw the beginning of people on television talking about race on things like 2020, and so we kind of have the sense there. I know for a fact in the 90s when I was in the military driving up and down the Jersey Turnpike, I can tell you we weren't post-racial. You know what I mean? So when did this happen? And I can tell you for a fact in the late 90s to the 2000s when I was out speaking about race and getting death threats from people, we weren't in a post-racial society. So that answers that question, but I don't think that's the question that we're always talking about when we ask the question, are we post-racial? Because we leave off part of the question. And I think the question really is, are we post-racial, comma, yet, right? So that's what I think we're really talking about, because the question that kind of indicates, are we there yet? And I think we need to examine that, because the question to me really becomes then, should we even be getting there? Because I was born black, I'm going to die black, and I actually kind of like the fact that I'm black. And so I don't need people to get past what I am. And that's really where these conversations take us. And really that's about the dominant society again. It's not really about accepting, tolerating, whatever words you want to use. It's not really about getting to a real, true conversation about what goes on with race. It's about getting past race. It's about not really dealing with it. It's about never being able to say, well, this is the period at which we got past race as a problem. I think race is a great thing. I mean, but we lie to ourselves. Every time, I say this all the time. If a man sees a woman and they think she's beautiful, they can tell you every detail about the woman. The woman was, redhead, she was 5 foot, blah, 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 all down the list. But when they see me, they can't tell you anything because they're colorblind. Well, that's absolutely ridiculous. And so I think we have to get to the point where we can talk about race in a real way. And one of the ways that I think that we know that we can't talk about race in a real way, and I'm kind of thankful for the advent of Barack Obama's presidency, is his presidency. You have a man who sits at the seat of power, right? Probably the most powerful man ostensibly in the world, yet he can't tell the truth about a lot of things. Barack Obama can't tell you that a cop who acted stupidly because he's black and he's challenging the identity of the white identity in America, because we know it's true. If you look at the report, the cop doesn't agree with Henry Louis Gates. The cop doesn't agree with the witness. The cop only agrees with the cop, and he went so far as to tell you later, if you kept paying attention to the case, that, well, the police report is only kind of a synopsis of what happened. It's not really the true facts, which tells you that this cop acted stupidly. And by the way, police reports are not that. So we know that we have a problem. Now, if you take that and you think about the university, to me, the university is the place where we explore ideas. But to a large degree, we haven't explored this idea in a real way, in my opinion. You go into the university, you go into classrooms, when you talk about race and you read about race, people don't really think critically like Ms. Younger was talking about. They don't think critically in that if you read a story about slavery, for instance, I've seen this and I know it to be true because I've talked to people about it. People will identify, for instance, white people. Not every white person, don't quote me on that. But people will identify with the person in the story who happens to be doing the good thing, right? They never identify with the person in the story who might be doing the bad thing when you read those historical texts. And the reason is because we want to not be guilty of anything. And so we don't even bother to think about the possibility of being something other. And so this is the problem, is that we can't get to the point where we're talking about race in a real way, because even when we think we're kind of empathizing with people, we're not really doing critical thinking at that point. And so what we wanted to do when we started this conversation about race a couple of years ago was get to the point where we had gotten the university to be talking about race, but talking about race in a different way. Because I think many people had thought, well, it's 2000, I think it was 7 at the time when we started. It's 2007, we must be at a certain point. But I can tell you, having been in those classrooms just prior to 2007, the people were still using some text from 1967, which, by the way, I don't think is academically sound, but that's not for me to say. From 1967 to talk about the condition of blacks in America and teaching this. And so people go forward understanding blacks in America as something that they are not. Go forward thinking about women as something that they are not. And this is the educated population. And I just want to touch on a couple of things that were mentioned before me, because I'm trying to save my voice if there are questions. it was said that the benefits of whiteness are obvious. I disagree with that. I mean, they're obvious to me, I think, and they're obvious to some of the people in this room. But I don't think as a whole they're obvious. Because if they were obvious, then we wouldn't have the conversations that we have the way we have the conversations. I think it's kind of like that old saying, the old Indian saying, right? The last thing the fish understands is the water in which it swims. We don't notice the air we breathe. It's just there. It's not obvious to people. Only when you're forced to confront it does it become something that you recognize. And similarly, people talk about understanding of the historical benefits. I think many people can talk about historical benefits without identifying that they have benefited from that same thing they're talking about. And these are things that we have to confront. And I will say similarly that black people, if we're going to break it into black and white, and I understand their shades, but we really talk in generality. Black people have to understand that they buy into the system also. So when we were talking before this and one of the previous panels, I talked about how I had a black roommate at one point who thought that there were more fat black women on campus than there were fat white women. And I challenged him to go to campus, pay attention to, take a conscious look at the people on campus and tell me if he thought that was true. When he came back, he had a different opinion. Well, I think we kind of know why that is. The standard of beauty is one thing, and so when you're not paying attention, you may afford more negative credit to those who aren't within the standard of beauty than those who are. And I don't like when we talk about far right and conservatives and them being racist, because there are plenty of people on the other side of the spectrum who are racist. There are plenty of people, by the way, who voted for Barack Obama who are racist. Voting for Barack Obama does not absolve you of racism. So I think that we need to think about what we're saying a little bit more, because that kind of stuff leads us to the belief that necessarily because young people are growing up in a society where they're more mixed at a younger age, that this type of thing we're experiencing is not going to go on. Take a look at what happens in the workplace. When you get into the workplace, because of the structural conditions that exist, that mixing stops to a large degree. People, if you want to succeed, you will do what it is necessary to succeed. And at a large degree, in these workplaces, a certain identity pushes you to the top. You being that gets people to pay attention to you in different ways. And so the mixing that you had done as a young person, you don't necessarily do, or you don't, or you're not open about it. And so I think the conversations we have, are we post-racial, are extremely important, but they have to include that other part, comma, yet, and why or why not, that's important.